Unfortunately, you didn't get to see the end of that. I'm not sure. I hope that I saw sparks bouncing off of the muffler area, but it kind of looked like they came out of there. So I don't know if it's a motor bearing or what, but I guess we're going to have to take the motor off there and see. I'm hoping it's just one of those pulleys is too far on the shaft and it's rubbing inside the steel housing of the tiller part, but I don't know. There was probably some fiddle involved in getting those pulleys to fit on this Harbor Freight motor with its metric shaft size. So, matter of fact, pretty sure I'm going to guess that is what happened. That those pulleys aren't tied on well, or if at all, or the woodruff key broke, or some kind of nonsense like that, because I could not get the tines to engage when I tried to shift it. It just made things rub worse. So that's the next investigation. But hey, motor runs. That's something. So even if it's junk for this machine, if I pull it off there and its bearings and everything are fine on the motor on the shaft part, well, it can be used for something ignorant. And well, see if we can find a better fit for this tiller mechanism, but we'll see. We'll dig into that next. All right, an update. Looky, no engine. Well, to figure out what's going on back there, obviously we had to remove it. So I didn't film it, but I was gonna show you real quick. Like, see these right here? There's one on each side, which I managed to send that one and its spacer into the abyss. It's down there by the wheel. I see it. Anyhow, take out those two bolts. These right here, these Frankenstein ears, back those out, because that's all that holds those two shafts in, and that's what holds the motor on. It slides up and down on that shaft right there, and that's how you go forward and reverse, and there's the two belts. Anyway, I could real quick tell what the problem was, because these obviously might have to be attached, engaged with the motor, right, in order to make the belts spin. Well, that's not making the motor spin, and yet the pulley's moving by itself. That's no bueno. So there's the problem. I don't know if a key's broke or what. Let's find out. By the way, in order to get the cable off, I guess I should have filmed it so you can see every single step. Had to loosen the two nuts holding the carburetor air filter housing on, take those off so that the carburetor could slide a little bit on its installation shafts, and then remove this that held the cable down. That was it. The rest I already showed you. The two bolts that are on the handle, screw in the sides right here, and then just take back those, you don't have to take them all the way out, but back those bolts out that were the Frankenstein posts, I'm going to call them. That was it. We saw the rest. Well, I do see a keyway. What have we got going on here? Well, I guess that doesn't matter if it spins independently, does it? No, I guess not. What is the purpose of that? And what is it? Does that have just melted belt material stuck on it? Not from these belts right now, but why would you need that on there? I guess just to make a spacer. I guess. Well, let's see. Maybe we'll have to try to find a parts diagram and look at this and see. Oh, the key just fell out of my foot, but it's there. Now, looking at this, is it possible that this pulley was installed backwards or something? No. Well, maybe, but I can clearly see what the problem is. Can you? Yeah, I can see. The camera can see it too. Let me get the key before I lose it. Yeah. The motor mount bolts. The pulley's grinding away on those. Good gravy. Well, I have a guess that what has happened to her is that maybe the shaft or the housing or something from this Harbor Freight motor didn't stick out as far as the original. I'm guessing. I mean, the seal and whatnot, you can see it looks okay in there, right? Does the motor turn more freely now? Yes. Surprise, surprise. You know, when you're dragging a cast iron pulley against 4 bolts, it'll make some drag. Well, now I feel better about myself. I must be strong like bull because I was able to start that motor. I'm just kidding, but well, what to do about it? I see giant washers and lock washers on there. What has occurred here? My theory is that the original, probably Briggs, I don't know what motor originally came on these Troy-Bilt ponies, maybe Tecumseh, I don't know, I have to look it up, but maybe that shaft was longer. If that's the case, then, well, no, that doesn't make sense either. No, because it looked like the belts were lined up, didn't it? I thought so. With that pulley distance in, which this is fixed because it's got a ride on there, I can't quite explain why would the, well, the only reason the pulley would be in too far is if this spacer, is that a spacer? Did they even put one in there? No. Maybe there has to be a spacer to push this pulley out farther, and that in fact the belts never were aligned with these other pulleys. Looking down here, this has some movement. I don't know if that's supposed to. It looks like there's a snap ring, so maybe that's what that's supposed to do. Is that turning the tines? I can't even tell. Yeah. All right. So it does turn the tines. Now, how does that possibly... How does that possibly do forward and reverse? Just by lowering or raising the motor? Because it just doesn't change the direction, right? I mean, the motor's gonna spin, in this case, counterclockwise. I just pulled the handle and it rotates this way. So, how does that possibly change direction by raising or lowering? I don't see how that would be a thing unless one of these belts crosses over. I don't know. That's peculiar. I have to think scheme on that one for a while, but anywho, I guess we got to figure out why that's scratching. I guess all I can do is find a washer that fits the shaft and see if I can push this out farther. I mean, I can take one of those engine mount bolts out and see if a thinner washer could be used, maybe. I mean, a thinner bolt. I don't know, but obviously this isn't gonna cut it. somehow we got to get this pulley to stick out farther, and it would seem to me that they just left out one fat spacer. But like I said, my concern is maybe it doesn't matter. It would seem to me the shaft would at least stick out to the end of the pulley, right? It doesn't. Is that enough? How much are we missing? Like ½ inch or so? I guess over the length of this whole pulley, considering how much strength you need to turn this. I guess if you've got a full 1.5 inches of key in there doing its job and a ½ inch isn't, I think that's enough engagement on this pulley that, you know, it wouldn't shear off. It's kind of a sloppy though fit. I guess you got to be sure that this bolt is tight. Well, it is what it is. Put that key in there. Go back in there with your friends. Get in there. Get. Yeah, so that's how it goes. Well, one other solution could be, maybe there is one, I didn't see it. No, there's not. It's gonna say drill a hole through here, thread it, and make a set screw, a socket head cap set screw situation, so that when this thing's on, you can set a set screw into that key, but it's well out of the way of the belts underneath it to hold that tight, and depend on that instead of this end bolt. I'm not sure. I don't know what the heck what is this giant washer? It seems like it's made out of Bakelite or something and not steel. I just don't know what that is. Well, I'm gonna get online and see what I can find out about these Bilt horse tillers and see if I can find a parts breakdown situation, diagram, whatever. I guess that's on there simply to keep the belts from getting off. I guess that makes sense. But that's no bueno. That's not gonna hold that too well. Well, on the other hand, if you think about it, if that's held on there, even if these could move a little, doesn't matter. With that key on there and everything squeezed in tight, as long as this didn't back out, even if it did a little, that key's still holding the pulley locked on the motor shaft. So it would have been spinning the belts. So again, I'm not sure why it didn't seem like it was engaging the tines, because that doesn't make sense unless something else that I'm missing isn't lined up correctly. The belts weren't stretching tight. I'm gonna have to investigate, see what can be figured out. I'm gonna have to get online and look at some forums and whatnot. So let me come back after I gain some knowledge. Okay, here's the diagram. This is a Bilt 860 is what I figured out it is. If you look at this diagram, you will see number 24 right in the middle of the screen. That washer's not installed, and that would push the pulley out some from those mounting bolts. Also, see number 30 and 31? There is no flat washer. Well, what's installed over there is some pretty thick flat washers. So 2 different times they went the wrong direction with making the bolt stick out too far and the pulley slide in too far the other way. That's why they're rubbing. So we're going to take the flat washers out, make sure the mounting bolts fit. Now maybe it's because the depth of the holes in the Harbor Freight motor are too shallow, so the bolt head stuck out. They thought, oh well, I'll just put a washer in there as a spacer. Well, you can't do it because it rubs the pulley. And we got to add that number 24 washer. So there you have it. This is a Bilt 860 with a Predator 212 engine restoration, I guess. And that reversing disc is part number 21 on this diagram. So I think with a belt, two different pulleys move in the same direction when they're stretched tight, right? But two wheels that are, well, one wheel that's spinning and then touches the other wheel causes that wheel to spin the opposite direction. So I think the 21 reversing disc is a friction deal that just comes in contact with the drive pulley below it and forces it to spin then backwards because it's physically touching it. And when you put the shaft in the forward position, it stretches the whole motor upwards, which pulls the belt tight, and then the pulleys are going in the same direction, which is counterclockwise. So how bizarre, how bizarre. But that's what I found. Let's go over there and look for a washer that fits the motor shaft and get rid of those flat washers for the motor mounts. It might involve grinding the, cutting a little bit off the end of the bolts. We'll see. All right, Dan. Let's see what's going on with these bolts. Let's just take one out. Give it the old looky-loo. What size is that? 9/16. Oh, we're not even tight. Perfect. I bet you. Yep, there's 3 washers that this person decided to put on there. So, I didn't look at the diagram to see. I halfway wonder if even though we pull this out farther, I guess when you're retrofitting, you just have to figure out the spacing distance difference for where that shoulder is on the shaft, right? How far out the pulley is going to end up, so how thick that washer or shim needs to be, because we're not using the original motor. Well, I don't know, but I wanted to see if this bolt bottoms out in the motor case, if that's what the problem was. Oh, well, first of all, I don't know how that worked, because that's not the correct size. Oops. Probably was 1/2 inch, but it doesn't want to go on over the giant burr. Yeah, it is. It's 1/2 inch. And yes, that's exactly it. It's getting tight. Yeah, it's getting tight. I better inspect the quality of these threads too. That's making me nervous. That'd be about right to find out it's stripped out. No. Well, let's check the second one. That one feels tighter. But let's just see. I hope they didn't, whoever had this didn't just, I don't think so, keep tightening it more and more, trying to get it to pull tight. Those are some pretty thick spacer washers. So, just don't know. Hate to have to lift this whole thing on and off down there, but I'm afraid that's what it's going to take in order to really see this geometry. I don't think I'm smart enough to take measurements and get it lined up just the way it's supposed to be before I actually physically try to fit it on there. In other words, the top pulleys have to align with the bottom pulleys so the belts aren't getting torqued. And that also makes, which I know was off, I can tell by the gouge marks, I figured this thing out, that it was supposed to be a pulley shaped piece that slips into the third pulley on the transmission end. And like I said, when the two discs touch, it forces it to spin in the other direction, but this acts like a V-belt, sort of. Well, it's a drive V that shoves inside the, V-groove on the transmission pulley, and since it's not a belt, it makes it spin in the other direction when it physically touches it. So that's how that works. It does make sense. But let's think here. So just scheming out loud here, for example, these spacer washers that they put on there that aren't in the drawing, right? Well, we know that if these were the bolts that mounted the original motor, they bottom out in the case of the Harbor Freight motor. So they have to get trimmed down if you want to use them. Or can the spacers go behind, in between the motor and here? That would push this out farther, but it wouldn't push the heads of the bolts out any farther than they already were. Does that make sense? Well, if it's that much we're chewing on, we need at least that plus some thickness for a spacer for the motor shaft. But you know what I mean? Since those get screwed in all the way, right? Before they had all this on them, which doesn't belong there. The only thing the drawing showed is the lock washer. So whatever thickness these two washers are together, if you were to put that behind here, in between the motor and this big bracket, the depth of the bolt going in would still be the same. Just the washers are on the back side instead of the front side, which would still mean you'd be rubbing by that amount, which means you still would have to get a spacer on the motor shaft, period, to keep the pulley from rubbing the bolt heads. So, okay, that's fine and dandy. That would do nothing to differ the length of this being out. That's just that center shim on the motor shaft would do that. So, what to do? It's either fool with that or simply trim the bolts down. I guess what a guy could do would be, I know I don't have any of these fine threaded bolts of this size. Maybe a guy could trim these old ones, trial fit everything, and if it works by trimming the bolt and not putting the spacer behind this bracket, that would be the best solution. And then just go to the hardware store and buy brand new bolts of the correct length, which would probably be about a 1/4 inch shorter than these. So it's one or the other. Move the washers to the back side of this bracket in between the motor and it and use the same bolts, or trim the bolts down. That's where we're at. So I just took the last two bolts. I just wanted to see what it looked like back there and to clean the filth out of this bracket, at least a little bit. So that's what that looks like on the back. Yep, bada bing, bada boom. You don't suppose there's just gack in the holes and that these holes are deep enough to accommodate that. Let's just screw one in bare. See how much it goes in there. Okay, so that's bottoming out. I can feel it, and that's where we're at. So I don't know what that distance is. This is a pretty thick casting over here, but it's not that thick. So that's exactly what happened. The original motor, Tecumseh or Briggs or whoever, must have had deeper mounting holes for the threads to go through. Or, sorry, for the bolts to fit. So simply we need shorter bolt. And I think a 1/4 inch would be plenty. So the cheapness and the get it donery in me says forget about it. Just grind the bolts off and go for it, which is probably what's going to happen. And then I'm going to install them just like the diagram showed, with just these and that lock washer, and that's it. So that's the plan. I like that plan. And then if it goes south, then I mean there's still plenty of threads that it'll engage. The whole length that goes in there is threaded, so I think we'll be fine. I'm gonna get hacksaw out and go to town. All right, be back in a minute. Okay, to illustrate the problem / solution. I already talked about it, so you know what I'm talking about. But looky, digital caliper. Pays to be a hoarder. See these 2 bolts up here? You can't because this dumb light's in the way. See these 2 bolts up here? Well, I found, believe it or not, in my stash, correct threaded bolts. They're about a 1/4 inch shorter. And the heads are a little bit thinner. Hope you can't see that. Well, trust me, they are. Doesn't want to focus. Rotten camera. Anyhow, these 2 are bottomed out. So, looky-loo. The space, the maximum amount of thickness that this can handle is about a 1/2 inch. Just barely over a 1/2 inch. 5/1000ths more than a 1/2 inch. Well, so, how thick is this? Where the bolt goes through, all right? Well, let's find out. On that part, it's well, you couldn't see it, but 0.52. So 20,000th past a 1/2 inch. So you would have thought that would have tightened, right? But for whatever reason, it didn't. We're going to need these shorter ones to do the job, and they'll work. What else? 3/4 inch motor shaft. I measured it. I don't have any 3/4 inch washers. Well, here's the pulley down here. So if the diagram shows there's a spacer between there and the other end that pushes those pulleys out a little bit, which would also, that's what you need to keep this from rubbing on those. Well, probably you don't now. Maybe just 1 washer, though. It makes sense anyway, so you're not shoving it against that crummy rounded shoulder in the Harbor Freight motor. Well, I don't have any 3/4 inch spacers like that, so I'm going to attempt to go stuff these in the lathe in the 3-draw chuck somehow, I guess. And then I have drill bits big enough. I have a 3/4 inch drill bit. Try to drill the center of the hole out to 3/4 inch so it'll slip just on this motor shaft and go in there. And I'm just going to do 3 of them so I have them, because I don't know what thickness I need to accomplish here. That's next. Okay, you don't need a lathe to do it. I got that old sneaky bit going, and this old fella, I just got a washer. I don't know where they all went, but they were this size. This size, sorry. Is that what it was? No, it wasn't. I had a stack of 3 anyway, they disappeared. Yeah, that bit worked just fine. Pinched him in the vise, horizontal, and was careful. And of course, I tried to bind up, but just go slowish. And anyway, there you go. So, who cares? Well, number 1, I got the plate mounted. There was no stripped out holes. They're good. And they have the shorter bolts, which have almost a 1/2 inch of threads going in to lock it into the motor. So this is solidly mounted, no problem. Okay, so that's step 1, right? Then this pulley. Well, look, if you take a piece of paper, stick it on the bolt head, right? Shove this on there. The paper is held So clearly it's still rubbing the slightly thinner bolt heads. Well, I initially made this one, which is a little thicker. The book over the diagram, I don't believe, listed a thickness of the washer. So I made 2 of them. Well, I think the thinner one is enough, because if you slide it on there, it goes on the shaft nice. You slide this on there, you jam a hunk of paper on the bolt head. Come on. Come on. Cooperate. Right? Paper's not bound up. So I'm thinking in order to add the least amount of thickness possible, we should go with this, the thinner of the 2 washers. And that's it. Now, the last thing, after I put the keyway back in there anyway, put that in, and this fella, and this fella. I think the original motor shaft was longer. I think maybe I want to put a spacer in here so that if you tighten this down hard, you're not caving the washer in the other direction. You know what I mean? That's probably overkill, but it only threads in about a 1/2 inch. And you got a 1/2 inch flopping around in that space, which doesn't add much strength. So I'm thinking, even if it's aluminum, that's fine. It's just a thickness spacer. It's not going to have any, it's not going to get worn, but something that sticks out almost to the surface of the pulley face here, so that when this gets screwed in there, secondly, you can get a lock washer that actually fits it. But I think that's it. I think I'm going to add a spacer right there to give it some strength side to side, and I think we'll call it a day. Put everything back together, see how those belts line up. That's next. Okie doke. Showed you the bolt heads don't rub. Now here's the cheesy spacer that I made, because, well, you gotta do what you gotta do. But it's the same height you see as the face of the pulley. So when this tightens in there, then the pressure of this dish shape washer squeezing on that reverse washer, that'll be it. I won't keep tightening until I cave the friggin' thing in there. You know what I mean? It's gonna stop. Alright, so that's it. Now I'm actually turning the motor over. So, the lock washer is the correct size for the dumb thing. That helps. I think we're there. I'm gonna put the 2 belts back on here, because I'm not sure they'll fit in this configuration. I think I got a key's already in there. Gimme. Of course, I didn't pay any attention. Are these the same size, I hope? Yeah, they are. So, those are in there like that. Yeah, whoop, nope. So I guess we're going to have to check is the alignment of the belts on those pulleys. If that is correct, we'll be in good shape in short order for testing. Then I just got to see when you push the lever. I'm sure there's an adjustment somewhere for how tightly the thing can go up and down and stretch against those belts to engage the motor. All right, that's on. Bada bing. Now, since the motor spins counterclockwise, remember, pull the pulley, that's the way it runs. Since it goes this way, if this encountered resistance, right, and the motor was spinning counterclockwise, the motor would want to keep going, this would stop. That should actually tighten the bolt more. when this comes in contact in reverse. So it shouldn't be the other way. Well, it's not the other way. Where what am I trying to say? That's why this isn't reverse threaded. When this rubs on the reversing disc on, well, the reversing pulley on the bottom, it would force this bolt tighter, not looser. So I think we're there. I'm gonna get these shafts cleaned up and lubricated, and then I guess lift the motor back in place and see how things look. Okay, we got it all put back together. A bunch of these nuts and bolts were loose. Man, take notes, other manufacturers. My God, they did it right. There's bushings in each one of those. So instead of using like the cheap way would just be use a bolt with a lock nut that you just get kind of tight, and that allows the movement. This has a brass bushing that controls the space between tightening that. So you tighten it tight like you should, and if it ever gets sloppy, you just replace the little brass bushing in there, just like it should be. Anyhow, everything works as near as I can tell. The motor doesn't bind on those. We already knew that there's no way it could, even when we had that on the bench. But now you can kind of see how the mechanism works. This lever over here is forward and reverse direction of the tines. Can you see that? So when you push forward, what it's doing is lifting the whole motor, all this. Pulls it up and pulls those belts tight. And the belts, near as I can tell, are pretty lined up straight with the pulley, so I'm glad we used that thin washer. I think we're in business. I wish the motor shaft was a little longer so you have the full like 2 inches of key engaged, but well, hey, I got this used at an auction. What are you gonna do? I still think that's plenty of force to do the job. The belts are pretty tight in the forward position like they should be, and then when you put it in reverse, that's neutral actually, and there's a spring detent that controls that. See, that's drive, and you can't stretch the bolts too tight because it physically hits the metal stop. There's no adjustment there, so I guess you just get the right size belts and that's it. They're expected, that's the tightness they operate at. So there's neutral, and then when you put it in reverse, it forces that reverse friction disc onto this pulley face. I would have thought it would jammed it in the center of that, but I guess not, because there's no wear marks like it ever did that. So I suspect it just kind of rubs and goes lightly in reverse for a second, like if you get bound up on something, you need to just real quick back the tines up, then you put it back in forward by pushing down and stretching the belts tight. That's it. So I'm going to leave it. That's definitely neutral, we know now. And the engine spins freely. And now you can definitely tell it has compression because it thumps where it's supposed to. So I guess we'll take it outside and run it for a sec. And then, well, I guess the thing to do would be change the oil on it, and then move on to, I think I already know the answer, but check the transmission fluid. I'm sure the seals are bad on the axles and the other part, but these tires are shot too. So if everything works well and I end up wanting to keep this, then I think I will order new tires. When those are off, I'll also take the 4 seals and install them. I have to buy 4 seals and so 2 for the wheel shafts there and 2 for the hub back here. I hate to do that until I can test it, and I really can't test it like engage the ground, dig a hole, test it, because I don't really have a good place to do that. But I guess I can bounce it on the rocks a little bit in the driveway, and if everything works, then we'll know the worm gears aren't stripped out or something. I'll test the high speed and low speed drive wheel mechanism. That also yeah, that would operate independently of the tiller tines. So you can leave the tiller tines in neutral, not spinning, and put the thing in drive and drive it around in high or low, apparently. So let's take it outside and get it tested. Well, let's try it again. Hold on. Okay, put the throttle on. Oh, now wait a minute. That's supposed to be all the way on full throttle, isn't it? Hold on. It is. That's just where it looks like on this one. All right, turn the fuel on. Choke is on. You're in the way of me pulling the cord, though. How can I put you so you can see something? Maybe like that? No. Maybe like that. Yeah, let's try that. You can see the tines, kinda. All right. Switch on. Choke's on. Boop. It's never over. I didn't check the transmission fluid yet. Apparently, well, I gotta look where the fill thing is in this one. But in this one, I guess it's this little fella right here. And I think underneath this handle mount is where it's at. Anyways, regardless of that, so I found a better manual for the older models online, and it describes this reversing disc. This is not lined up correctly. It's going to be real hard to see this, but if you look in there where we put that shim behind those pulleys, I don't know if you can see in there. Well, they're not back far enough. It's hard to see it, but I can see it better from the angles that I can fiddle with here, but the phone can't get in there. This camera can't get in there either one. Anyway, it needs a bigger shim to push these pulleys on the motor shaft back farther because the belts are not quite lined up right, and more importantly, when you try to put it in reverse, that reversing disc doesn't go to the near center of the groove like it should. Instead, it just hits the edge of the very edge, actually, of the pulley and starts to tear it up. It's just a fiber disc. It's supposed to be for occasional use to stick it in reverse like I thought, but it's not lined up right. So we got to put that other shim in there. The fatter washer, I think, will do it, and we'll see how things look after that. So, you know, more of the same. I need to check that oil, probably add gear oil, and then it'll all leak out on the floor. And then probably, if a guy wanted to turn this thing into fully functional and good, I need to check how much slop there is on the gears in there. If those are good, it needs new tires and probably seals. I already mentioned a couple times, seals on that shaft and seals on the seals on the tying shaft. I don't know if it's worth all that. I don't think so. Not for me. Now with an add-on motor, maybe if it was all original and the gear mechanism is checked out as good and all the pulleys are good, the fiber disc wasn't worn. You know, if you could bring it back to pretty much new configuration, at least mechanically, and then, you know, paint it or work on the aesthetics, that's one thing, but I don't think I'm going to mess with all that. I'm going to make this a functional unit, make all the adjustments correct, and make sure it's got lubrication where it needs it, and call it a day. This should be a good garden tiller for somebody, and we'll see how that goes.